Thank you very much, John. It's great to be here. I'll talk and I'll assume that it'll be on the screen. Good, we're on the way. It's really great to be here. I think you've got a fantastic venue, a wonderful spot. I'm surprised at the 100% attendance at the moment. I thought there might be a few who were out surfing or deciding that outside was more attractive than in here. I just want to say to you at the beginning that you're in the forefront of the battle for kids' minds. You are in one of the most important jobs in the world. If I had my life all over again, I'd be a teacher, no hesitation. Hugely challenging, but wonderfully rewarding. But I wanted to start just with a story which is a bit silly, but I hope you'll enjoy it. A very earnest teacher was giving a talk about healthy living and decided that they'd use an experiment for test tubes. And the plan was a worm, 4 separate worms were going to be put into 4 test tubes. So the first worm went into a test tube which had alcohol. The second worm went into a test tube of cigarette smoke. Third worm went into a test tube of chocolate syrup. And the fourth worm went into a test tube of good, clean, living soil. So in the course of the lesson, while we're talking about healthy living, clearly some things happened in the test tubes. And at the end, the teacher was able to reveal the results of the experiment, and it was true that in 3 of the test tubes the worm had died, and they were obviously the ones with alcohol, cigarette smoke and chocolate syrup. But the worm had survived, obviously, in the good, clean soil. And so the teacher said, what can we learn from this? And a really smart kid put up his hand and he said, well, if you drink alcohol, smoke and eat chocolate syrup, you won't get worms. I'm sure that some more very earnest messages in the past have been been grossly misrepresented. I hope mine don't today. Well, I'm on the topic of valuing people and leading change. We have got in Maori, the question says, what's the greatest resource? And the answer comes, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. And that is, it's people, it's people, it's people. Now, in one sense, as you know, that is true. Our people are our greatest resource. But I want to start and remind us, as has happened right at the beginning of the conference, our greatest resource is God. But in the work that we're doing, it won't actually be the buildings or the systems or the IT or whatever. It's those people you're working with, your teachers, your ground staff, your tuck shop people, and the very kids that you're working with. So John referred to the book that I wrote, and I was going on radio and television programs. They had approached me to do some articles about this book. And from my days in World Vision, I was trained that you go into an interview and you have 3 key ideas. And I said to my daughter, look, this is crazy. I can't really get my head around what's the book about. And there they really are the 3 things, which I think is the role of a leader. Value your people, bring out the best in your people, and release people's potential. And I don't want to gloss over that too quickly. I want to kind of ask you, what are you doing about it? You've got these valuable people in your school. You've got these wonderful students. And quite often we forget that they are the ones who can easily lead. They can do wonderful things. So on this first half of my talk today on valuing people, I want to bring out and cover those 6 themes. Having high expectations, praise and celebration, being generous, involving the grassroots, being a coach, and giving constructive feedback. So stretch your people, believe in them. The story that I want to tell is that we had this incredible opportunity at Maclean's College. I started a school from scratch. I don't know if any of you have had that, but what an incredible privilege to choose my own staff, to work with that group of kids. The way it happens in New Zealand, a new school begins with kids in grade 8. This is secondary, and then they next year become grade 9 and there's a new group in. So you have them right from the beginning. And I had the pick of the teachers of New Zealand for this new school. We had 300 people apply for 10 jobs. It was a time of huge teaching surplus, and this was to be one of the plum schools of New Zealand. And so I chose the best. And in New Zealand, in grade 10, I'm using your terms, I'm not using New Zealand year numbers, so in grade 10, in those days, we had national examinations for grade 10. Approximately 50% of the students passed, and obviously 50% failed. It was just a scaling mechanism. Half went through and half missed out. And I had this absolutely mad idea. I never communicated it with anybody, but I actually thought all 200 could pass. Now, of course, it's ridiculous. We had 200 students in the first lot of grade 10 exams, and we should have expected 100 to pass. Well, we had 172 out of 200 passed in that first year of putting them up to grade 10 exams, and I felt an absolute failure. 28 kids had failed in my school. The staff were great, but in the course of that next year, some of those 28, of course, came back to school, and they had, in those days, to repeat their grade 10 year. They weren't allowed to do grade 11. And there was one boy whose actual intellectual qualities were put him in the bottom 20% of kids. So on a percentile ranking, he was actually 18. In other words, 82% were brighter than he was intellectually. And he was quite depressed. He was walking around the school one day, and I went back to the staff room and I asked the staff, I said, look, if any of you teaching so-and-so, could you send him to me for praise? And in the course of the day, one teacher sent him for praise. I had a stamp with a big cheesy grin which said, you make me happy. Incidentally, lots of teachers like that stamp too. And I did this. He was sent to me, and he'd actually brought, it was done in woodwork, and it had a wooden base and a metal rod and a sail and a cup hook for putting your keys on. And I raved about it, said it was wonderful. There it is there. And away he went to class, he finished it. At the end of the year, he came back. And he said to me, he wanted me to have it. And I said, no, it's so beautiful, you should keep it. And he said, no, I want you to have it, he said. You're the only one who believed in me. Now, it's not true that I was the only one who believed in him. He had good teachers, he had good parents. But what I want to ask you today is, who in your school will say you were the only one who believed in me? Because I have a feeling that if I went round you and asked, why are you here today? Some of you would point to a teacher who turned you round. A teacher who'd spoken to your life and said, Jack, you could be a principal. And I want to say to you, who are you doing that to? Are you doing it to your grandchildren? Are you doing it to your neighbour? Are you doing it to your church pastor? Because I think it must be ghastly being a church pastor. You're probably on the receiving end of some vague levels of flattery and a great deal of trenchant criticism over the lunch tables. And I think that I'm just really encouraging you. Are you believing in your minister? The second thing in this, I want to just talk about high expectations. When I went back to Mount Roskill Grammar School, it was really awful. It was a low socioeconomic area by then, and it was a large school, and it was actually a mess, I thought. And for a school that used to be with a top rugby team, it was just awful. We had 2 rugby teams when I arrived at the school. One played 2D, in other words, not first 15 rugby, and the other was 4A. And we had this, I appointed after 6 months, I appointed a man in Fazed who was a good rugby player, and he got together 50 large boys, largely Polynesian but not entirely, to want to go and play rugby. That would have made 2 teams at what we call open weight grade, 2 potential first 15s, but we couldn't play first 15 rugby because we had to win the second grade competition before we could be allowed to play first 15. Anyway, the secretary of the rugby union rang the manager at our school and said, look, because Prentice has come to your school and we know he's rugby mad, we're prepared to let you have a first 15. You don't need to qualify, you can play. The man in charge of rugby, not the bright Fazeda, but the man in charge, a doer kind of a man, said, no, we'll turn it down. Fortunately, the guy rang me and he said, we were quite surprised. We offered your school the chance to play first 15 rugby and the man in charge of rugby turned it down. I said, well, we're accepting on the spot, thanks. So I went straight to the coach of the first 15 and said, we're in. And then he went and saw the boys and said, Prentice has got us into the first 15 competition. They all went, fantastic. So I went back to the manager, and I said, look, why didn't you accept first 15 rugby competition? 3 reasons, he said. First of all, they wouldn't turn up to the game. He said, we've done this before. They used to play basketball on Friday night. They'd be too tired. They wouldn't turn up. Secondly, he said, they have to bring food along to the reception afterwards. He said they wouldn't bring food. And then he had me. Third, he said they have to dress up at the function afterwards and we don't have a school tie. I said, well, first of all, I'll go in the car and get them to a rugby match, but I'm sure they'd turn up if it's first 15. They know that. As to the food, I know that Maori and Pacific know all about hospitality. They'll bring the food. But if they don't, I'll buy cream buns. And thirdly, I said, and as for the tie, I said, when I was a boy at this school, we had a school tie. I said, I'll make a tie, which we did in 6 weeks. So I told the coach these 3 things, and he went back. This is on this thing about expectations, okay? I told the coach, he went into the boys, largely Polynesian, but incidentally the son of a judge, a Pākehā, a European, Caucasian. And he said, well, first of all, you have to turn up at the rugby. I mean, they looked at him as if he was mad. They said, of course we'll turn up. Secondly, he said, you have to bring food every second week. Bring the kai? No sweat. Thirdly, you have to wear a tie. Mr. Prentice is having a tie specially made for you. Like going to church? Fine. Now, I tell that story so that we are shaken out of our expectations. That dear man, that manager, he had such low expectations. These boys weren't going to even turn up. We played in the competition. In the grading round, we won the grading round and played 1A. We played Auckland's leading schools. And the leading school in Auckland's called Auckland Grammar School, and we held them to 6-3. The headmaster said, what have you done? I was all worried. I'd arrived late and didn't know what he was talking about. He said, what have you done to the school? The following year they played in the curtain raiser at Eden Park to an All Black match. Now I want you just to go back and think, what if we had not had the opportunity to play first 15 rugby? Whose opportunity was being wasted? A whole lot of boys who walked tall as a result of having the opportunity. And how stupid to think they wouldn't wear ties. Like going to church, it's an absolute insult. And yet we have to be so careful, don't we, that we don't have low expectations for this group of our class or this in our schools. Similarly, I'm very high on the high expectations. When I went to World Vision, I suggested we should have 95% customer satisfaction rate. I really wanted 100, but we put it, our key target was 95%, and the staff thought it was far too demanding. Every year we did a random survey asking people how they felt about their contact with World Vision. And the first year we hit the 95% satisfaction rate. The next year it dropped to 94%. And I'm telling you, the staff were appalled, absolutely appalled. They had meeting after meeting to improve it. And the following year it went to 96% satisfaction rate. I'm darn sure if we'd set a satisfaction rate at 80%, we'd have probably got about 85. Now, I know you have to be careful about what you expect, but I want to really challenge you that in valuing people, let's set some high standards. The next one I want to talk about is praise and celebration. When I had an incredible scholarship to London for a year, I visited one school in Britain where the principal was given a year off and he went back to investigate his school, sort of out of hours. And the overwhelming feedback that he got about his school was the absence of praise. He was a scientist, he was absolutely mortified, and he went back and he was determined to give 5 lots of praise for every bit of criticism, and he kept a mark book to see that he was doing it. That's a little bit mechanistic. But I used to find that a note of praise, people would do anything. I mean, they don't do things to get the note of praise. It's the things that they do and they don't think you've even noticed. And I had an assistant groundsman who was in his late 60s, and he used to do all our flower beds. And I'd write every now and then a note to him and just say, "Dear Harold, thanks for the beautiful new flowers that you've planted by our wherever," and so on. And this dear man, he died, and I was asked to speak at the funeral. And they actually asked me. I'd always treated him in a nice way and written him nice notes, but he had requested that I did speak at his funeral. I didn't know this, and that I should read from John Donne, "No Man is an Island." Now, if you know how complex a metaphysical John Donne is, here's this assistant groundsman who knew all about John Donne, and I was introduced as the guy, the principal of the school that Dad loved to work at. And they said, when we went into Dad's groundsman's shed, we found a whole lot of notes pinned up on his board, and they were from Colin. You never know, do you, what your notes do? You never know how valuable your notes are. I really want to encourage you to think about your people and how are you making sure that they feel really valued. In my life, I've experienced incredible generosity, which I'm glad I have, that in turn I felt I needed to share. The first school I taught at as a teacher, my head of department said to me, "Colin, my storeroom is open to you. Anything you want to pinch, take it. Any of my ideas. Drop in and watch me teach. If you like the idea, just use it." And that led to my always feeling any of my teaching notes anybody could have, I didn't care. Then, at another time in my life, I was doing very well as head of English at a large school in Auckland. And the boss called me into his office one day and I was a bit shocked, and he said, "Colin, you're doing well, but we're going to give you another job. You've got to be Dean of Grade 8. He said, "You couldn't be a deputy principal if all you've been has been on the academic side. We've got to give you more duties, but the duties have got to be in the discipline and pastoral area." And he said this, "In doing this, I'm hastening your departure, but I cannot not do it." And 15 months later, I was deputy head at the age of 32 and a half. What generosity. And I've learnt in life that all my people, my job from then on was to make them marketable, to use them while I had them, and to help them to the jobs that they aspire to. I think in my life now, 14 people who've worked with me have gone on to be principals of New Zealand schools. And that's something I'm very proud of, that people have actually been part and been kind of trained and known, when you're ready to go, we want you to fly. And I had practice interviews with them. And particularly for women stepping into leadership roles, that was very important. I didn't train them, I had other women do it, so that in fact there was a kind of a real club of us advancing people. I also want to encourage that you walk about. Managing by walking about seems to me to be crucial. You pick up good ideas, you see body language, you get feedback. I found very good advice was often given to me by my caretaker. He knew where the real troublemakers hung out. He could give me all sorts of advice on people who were breaking the law and various things. But it wasn't just that. He also really liked to be part of the whole thing. And although he was always a bit embarrassed, I made the staff meeting in the morning, everybody had to attend. I'm talking about the groundsman, not the assistant groundsman, but everybody, the caretaker, they all came in. They took their muddy boots off at the door and came in. A lot of the evidence on how to improve organisations is that you actually go and ask the people right close to the troops. They will know far better than you. And I learned in World Vision, amazingly, I'd been travelling into World Vision for about 6 months. And World Vision in Auckland was on 4 floors, and where I parked my car, I walked in on floor number 3 to then climb up one set of stairs to my office, which was on floor 4. And I never really thought about what went on floor 1 and floor 2. And floor 1 was the store. And after about 6 months, I went down into the store one day. It was the middle of winter, and it was freezing. And it was freezing. And the doors, there was the drafty, it was terrible. I felt ashamed. And so from then on, I used to go in early in the morning at 7, and at 8:30 I'd begin my walk around the whole office. And I'd go down to the bottom floor and see how they were before I moved up into customer service, then into marketing, and so on. And it's amazing what happens when you just walk around and ask what's doing, how much mail have we got, what's your biggest challenge, what's not working, how could I actually help? Astounding what happens. I want to encourage you about this be a coach. It took me until I was about 50 to realise how essential that was. I've been coached in my life by brilliant people, and I was forgetting my job was to coach them. You see, every time you take on a job, you stop somebody else doing it. And you can't do all the jobs in the day that you think you need to do. You need to take your diary of last month, April, and you should go down and have a look at all the tasks and the interviews you had, and you should highlight 3 of them that should have been given away. But you just can't drop them on people. You actually have to decide, okay, that job should not have been done by me. That was ridiculous. Who should have it? And what's the coaching process? Who needs to be coached? I'm going to talk a bit more about coaching in another session. Finally, this is the one that we all find the hardest. It's easy to praise, although we often forget to praise. This is the one we know we should do, and we often are absolutely gutless and cowards. And the more I think about it, it is really terrible to let a very good person, but with some kind of a flaw, get away with it. Because we may be the last opportunity of a person to actually say to them, listen, I want to talk to you about something that I think could derail you. Or I want to talk to you about a habit or a something of yours that really grates, not only with me, but other people on the staff. And there's all kinds of good techniques of giving and receiving of constructive feedback. And I want you to think about who in your staff room do you need to do that to? Who do you need to speak to? It might be your deputy. It might be an aspect of your deputy's work that they will be a better deputy if they attended to this or that. Okay, so what I want to do now is, we're sort of halfway through, I hope I am. I wanted to ask you, just in pairs, where you are, it's not written down on there, this is just a break so the knowledge becomes your knowledge. What's the most important idea you've heard so far for you? The most important thing so far for you. And will you just share it with the person next to you, please? I have to. That squeaks. So I'm standing.
See if we can fix it up.
Yeah, I just thought I'd mention it. I don't like it.
Seem to be when you turn like that there.
Oh, okay.
But I'll put it on this side. Hopefully it will fix it.
Okay, brilliant.
Sorry
Thank you.
about
That's all right. Good.
I've also got that up a little bit too. So when
Yeah, so if I say P, I've got to watch my P. Because otherwise it's split.
I've got it.
Okay. Usually I get a few people to tell me their ideas, but I've got this feeling that adult education, it's all very well listening to a speaker, but the key thing is what am I going to do about it? And sometimes you can sit and say, yeah, good idea, but until you're asked what's the most important idea for me, and I'd like to think that you did do something about it. Now, I forgot to tell you that some of the cards about praise, I gave a talk like this in New Zealand maybe a year or 18 months ago, and about writing notes. And Blim and Laurel and their crowd immediately gave me these cards, and one says awesome, another says gimme 5, another says flying high. And they've got them both for primary school kids and secondary school kids, different ones. I've completely used the 2 packs they gave me, and Laurel's promising to give me more. You don't need to have a flash like that, but I think that makes it so much easier. I took one of these and I wrote it to a bloke in our church who was turning 80. Can't remember which one, probably was awesome. Anyway, I just said what a great role model he'd been for me in the church, how I hoped when and if I reached 80 I could still be so highly regarded, etc., etc. Anyway, apparently it was the best card he received. He showed all the family, and it was just, you see, the great thing is you can't write much either. See these cards? They're tiny. But you get one of those, or whatever you do, I just want to really encourage you to do that. Okay, so we're on to leading change. I've been to some incredible training courses, one at Harvard and another one at a British leadership training school called Ashridge. The really interesting thing about this one at Ashridge, which I'm not on specifically on leadership, but these were the best. They have 40,000 people who have been through their courses. The feedback on the best leaders were listed, and they were the key qualities. They're comfortable with change, they share power with their followers, acknowledge their limitations, know what they stand for, display both rational and emotional sides, the head and the heart, and they're optimistic even when they don't feel like it. I offer that to you mainly because, and obviously I'm about to talk about leading change, and you notice the first one, it's not in any order, is that some of the best leaders in the world are comfortable with change. And I want to say that to you. I want to really be pushing, not that you just seek change for change's sake, but I hope to, in this next 20 minutes, to persuade you it is worthwhile to embrace change and intelligently to run with it. And then usually when I'm training or working in courses with CEOs, from the same leadership course, they were considered for, and after all the heads in the room today are CEOs. 4 key things: they need to be strategic, they need to manage change, here we have it coming again, they need to understand and exercise power, and they need to read culture. That's about the only really original thing here in the talk. I said that. A leader has a healthy dissatisfaction with the present. I quite like it. It's a healthy dissatisfaction. It's not coming in to try to be difficult and just to be egotistical. But I bet all of you, as the leader of your school or your institution, there'll be some things that are driving you mad. And that some of these things do have to be fixed up. And I'm encouraging you today to think, okay, I'm going to be strategic. I'm going to implement change. So I hope that I can persuade you that you accept that change is natural and that you'll be positive about it. That you will involve people and you'll be honest. Some of the worst things about change tactics and things that happen in change is that people minimise the damage. There'll be a few redundancies, when in fact they know darn well there's going to be massive redundancies. I just honestly think that we've got to be honest about the change. We need to exercise situational leadership. Sometimes we'll need to be really firm and say this is where we're going. Or maybe we'll say this is where we're going, but I'm a bit more relaxed about how we get there. Sometimes we actually have to say it's happening regardless of whether you like it or not. But I'd hope that there'd be an aspect of consultation with it. Clearly, as well as that, we need to communicate. But communicate doesn't just mean talking. It means listening, and particularly reading feedback. I want to encourage you as well in leading change that you ask for advice from your staff on how best to do it. There was a situation in World Vision where we actually had to reduce the budgets. And it was very tempting just to go in and for kind of head office to make these budget cuts. But in fact, I've learnt in life that if you share the challenge with the staff will work intelligently with you to either grow the income or reduce the costs. Sometimes it's amazing what they come up with. Now, I know sometimes you have to be the leader, and I'm all for that, but I think it's crazy not to ask for advice from your staff. You do need to be firm and fair, and you must be friendly. Sometimes it may require new staff, and sometimes that means putting off some staff, and you need to celebrate and praise. Now, what I want to do now is I want to talk you through I'm going to spend now time on these three. They're three totally different aspects of change that occurred, and I could probably mention 15 or 20, but they're different kinds. The first one is, I've got the change in attitude to grade 12's academic standards at Maclean's. So I want to just tell you about this. We were doing really well with the grade 10 exams, you heard that, spectacularly well. We did brilliantly at grade 11. That used to be called university entrance. And then at grade 12, we did very well, but not brilliantly. Not actually to the level of either grade 10 or grade 11. In our country, in grade 12, in those days, there were 200 scholarships given. And the best school in New Zealand, this crowd called Auckland Grammar, it used to win 30 of the 200. And the next best school in New Zealand got 5. And then the rest of the schools, and there were about 400 secondary schools, so the other few fought over the remaining scholarships and usually got 1 or 2. Now, I went to England and I had a year on a scholarship. And I can't believe the government spent all that money, sent me over to England on full salary to study at the University of London. It's the number one scholarship that every principal died for in our country, called the Commonwealth Relations Trust Scholarship, and there were 4 Aussies and 2 Kiwis, and the Antipodeans we used to meet. And my study that I chose was to go and have a look at the schools of Britain and work out what made an effective school and how could you make schools more effective. Now, in the process of my going to visit a whole lot of British schools, I went to the famous ones, Eton and Harrow. But where I was training, they were a teachers' college, and they recommended I go to some very poor areas, but where schools were doing spectacularly. And I came away from a couple of these schools thinking, I cannot believe what they're achieving with the calibre of the kids, and the environment is horrible, and yet they're doing brilliantly. They were getting kids into Cambridge and Oxford from absolute, apparently deadbeat areas. Terrible. So when I came back to New Zealand, I now had a focus, and I now felt we were doing poorly. So this is the leader is unhappy. The leader's just had a year swanning away in London and Europe. The rest of the staff have been working their guts out, and here he comes back in August, all gunned up, all fit, looking very healthy, actually having been to Perth on my way home, and I had to say to the staff, we're not doing well enough. Now, I had my facts and figures. I explained to the staff that I thought that the results in grade 10 and 11 were spectacular, and that what we were getting was 2 scholarships out of 200. And even one year we got 3, and we thought we were fantastic. And I said to the staff, the challenge is the bottom line from now on is we've got to get 5. Now, in effect, in saying we've got to get 5, that meant we're going to be second or third best in the country. And the staff came on board. Is amazing. This was a change that I instituted at the top level of the school. I met all of the grade 11 who were going into grade 12 next year, and I told them that I thought we could do better. We had 100 grade 11 going on into grade 12, and I said, I want you to join my scholarship group. Well, there's a lot of kudos joining the principal scholarship group, but I don't know what it's like in Aussie, but in New Zealand we don't like tall poppies, and particularly it's okay to be a tall poppy in sport, but it's not okay to be a tall poppy academically. I think the word we use is a geek or a nerd. Don't know what your words are in Aussie, but anyway. But 30 people decided to join. And I said, we'll have a meeting once a month, and I'll talk to you about diet, sleep, playing enough sport, and healthy body, healthy mind, healthy spirit. And I allowed the teachers simply in each of the subjects, no change to the structure, no streaming, nothing, but they were allowed in each subject to have 10 lectures, so 10 lectures in physics, which were before school or after school. And so that was the only change, but plus the fact we're going to do better, we now realise we could do a heck of a lot better. And all I can tell you is that at the end of the year, incidentally, my private target was 10. Publicly 5, privately 10. And at the end of the year, when the results came out, people started phoning me. The most exciting thing was they kept saying, we've done it, because I told them we're doing this as a team. We got 7. The one mark below the cut-off, we had 2 people. We nearly got 9. And people from very expensive private schools rang me and said, because everybody looked with amazement, this is Maclean's College, this is a state school. Second best in New Zealand. How have they done it? Well, this is one instance where it happened with the leader saying we're not doing well enough. That's one. Now, the second thing I want to talk about, it didn't come from me. I'm at Mount Roskill Grammar. In fact, I was totally irritated by this. One of my loyal deputy principals started agitating, not behind my back. He knew you didn't dare agitate behind my back, but he agitated in front of me and at a couple of staff rooms that we should move to a new structure in our school. I've got no idea whether they mean anything to you. Houses, you break the school into for houses, but not just for sport, but for academic. You're in a house all the life of your time at the school. And I don't know whether vertical forms means anything into you, but in the pastoral grouping, that group which some countries call tutor group, or where you meet where they take the role and you do the major administration of the school, to change from where you would be all grade 8s together in your tutor groups, that we would actually have a few grade 8s, a few grade 9, a few grade 10, a few 11 and 12, so that young ones would already be mixing every day with older ones. Older ones would have the opportunity to exercise leadership, etc. Do you do that in Aussie? Do you have vertical forms? Some do. Well, I was absolutely opposed to it. The reason being that in New Zealand, the only schools that had vertical forms were what I would call liberal schools, and I don't think many people would ever describe me as a liberal. And so I was absolutely against it. So it got to a point where this man was saying he really thought we should do it. And I said, right, I'm very happy for you to do the research. We'll have a vote. But I want to make clear about this. There'd need to be an 85% vote by the staff in favour for it to proceed. Now, I thought I completely killed it, 85%. And they only wanted vertical forms. They didn't want houses. And I said, if you vote for vertical forms, you as well are voting for houses. I think that's what happened with your Republican stuff the other time, wasn't it, when you managed to do about 2 things with 1 vote. Anyway, they did their research, they presented the stuff. I'm unwilling, but I'm trying to remain neutral, all right? 88% vote in favour. Now, if you say this, you have to do it. And we did it. And a year later, I said to friends, I'd never go to a school without vertical forms. It was the most amazing transformation I've ever seen. I'm not saying you have to do it, but all I can tell you is I had always been used to a group in pastoral care of the same age, and I have to say I was absolutely sold. Third one. So that was leader. First one's the leader doing it. The second is the staff within come up with an idea and the leader provides some boundaries. And I have to tell you, I think probably all round, I think it was great to make it 85% because why make a radical shift unless there's huge, huge support for it? Other people say, well, did you ever talk to the kids? No, we didn't. And I think if we talk to the students are actually often quite conservative. And I'm not sure they would have voted for it, particularly the grade 12s loved hanging out with grade 12s. But in fact, if we'd had a vote 2 years afterwards, the kids in the school would have overwhelmingly said, well, why would you want to, is there another system? This is brilliant. Now, the other change I want to talk about was externally. I think these names mean something to you. Caldwell and Spinks. Is Caldwell famous in Aussie? Certainly, that's the self-managing school. And in 1989 in New Zealand, we began a thing called Tomorrow's Schools. What it really was giving the central organisation devolving some power, a little money, and lots more responsibility to schools. It was very clever stuff. But in the process of doing all that, most of my colleagues were terrified. And most of them spent 5 years moaning about it. But fortunately, what we saw at Mount Roskill Grammar was a huge opportunity. I come from an academic background. I'm hardly an entrepreneur, but I became an entrepreneur because I needed the money to spend it where I wanted to spend it. It was amazing. And so, we until 1989, we could only appoint teachers and ground staff and secretaries. Nobody else. Wouldn't get paid for, and you weren't allowed to have other staff. From 1989 on, we were allowed to appoint staff if we could find the money. And the biggest challenge at Mount Roskill Grammar was getting kids to school. This was a low socioeconomic area. I appointed another head prefect of Mount Roskill Grammar who had come out of the police force, a big Samoan man. And he and I remember saying to him, would you come as our youth worker? Didn't call him an attendance officer, I wanted to call him a youth worker. And he said, Colin, it would be an honour to come. And the attendance rate after 1 month of this youth worker rose from 82% to 92%. 1 month, a youth worker brought 10% more of our school back. I have to say it was remarkable. The level of fighting in the playground reduced. He and I would walk in the grounds together. I felt stronger. And then I had a number of my staff who were unable to carry on teaching. I actually really believe in mothers being at home with their children. My wife brought up our 4 kids at home, and then when the kids are brought up, she went out to work. But I know that it's another generation, and I knew that a number of my best women said, look, Colin, if only we could get decent preschool facilities, we could teach at least part-time. We built an early childhood centre in the grounds of Mount Roskill Grammar. It made $100,000 for Mount Roskill Grammar School every year. And we weren't ripping people off. We ran one of the best early childhood centres in the country in the grounds of Mount Roskill Grammar. We took a loan to build the building, and we were contributing $100,000. We couldn't have done it. Now, and the third thing is, we actually decided that we would take international students. And international students came and contributed $8,000 a head. And I had that for 2 things. One was I wanted 100 computers in the school, and I wanted major initiatives for Maori and Pacific kids. And that money gave us those opportunities. So what I want us, in all of this that I'm talking to you about, is will you be positive about change? Will you just not immediately say no? Will you be open to change? Will you go back to your schools and have a think about what does need to change? How might it change? Who would help me to change it? When people come and suggest change to you, I hope I'm not saying you just give in and say yes, 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 but you'll think through, and maybe you'll actually set some challenges to people who want to make the change. And when your government brings forward, I heard Daryl say, I think it's huge opportunity but huge challenge. Can I ask you to bring your best brains to exploit the opportunities, not to lament things? We cannot turn the clock back. When I started running Maclean's College, one of the slogans I used was space-age school with age-old values. And that's me, space-age school with age-old values. So I think I'm done. There's just this one, because the structure of the talk, we're not doing the questions. Daryl will handle that, but I'd just like to go on to that. This is one of my favourite quotations, because it's very easy at a time when things are difficult in recessions in a country. Both our countries are hit, but nowhere near as badly as the United States of America or Britain, to feel powerless. And I wanted to remind you of the power of one. I'm talking about you. I'm only one, but I am one. I can't do everything, but I can do something. And I won't let what I can't do stop me from doing what I can do. Will you go out and be can-do people for God?